Picture your local British high street today. Right in the middle, sitting on the absolute most expensive piece of real estate in town, is a massive, empty concrete box. The automatic doors are firmly bolted shut, the giant glass display windows are covered in faded vinyl decals, and if you cup your hands and peer inside, the escalators sit completely motionless in the dark. For decades, these colossal buildings were the beating heart of local retail. They housed a brand that felt as permanent as the pavement outside, but today, they stand as towering monuments to a completely different era of shopping. One of the most popular recurring questions simply asks people what exactly is sitting in their city's old Debenhams store today. The answers paint a hilarious but bleak picture of municipal confusion. People report that their local stores have been hollowed out to build overpriced student flats, while others mention bizarre temporary conversions into indoor go-kart tracks. In many cases, the buildings are left entirely vacant simply because the local council has absolutely no idea what to do with 100,000 square feet of empty space. They're too big to easily repurpose and way too expensive to demolish, so they just sit there slowly rotting away. Debenhams survived for 242 years, outlasting 2 world wars, the Great Depression, and multiple financial crashes to become a fixture of the British high street. For generations, it was the default destination for school uniforms, wedding outfits, and Christmas presents. Then, in a matter of months, the entire physical operation was dismantled, with stores permanently closing, the employees losing their jobs, and the brand sold off to an online fast fashion retailer. This is how it happened, and who ended up profiting after the dust settled. Back in 1778, in the midst of the American Revolutionary War, a man named William Clark was quietly opening a draper's shop in central London. He catered strictly to the capital's wealthy elite by dealing in the kind of exquisite fabrics that cost an absolute fortune. When an investor named William Debenham pumped his own cash into the operation in 1813, the company locked in a trajectory of massive expansion. During the Victorian era, the whole concept of a department store completely blew people's minds. Before this, shopping was an exhausting marathon across town where you had to buy your boots from a cobbler and your coats from a tailor. Debenhams changed the rules of commerce entirely by throwing everything under one massive and luxurious roof and turned a mundane weekly chore into a highly theatrical leisure activity. As the 20th century kicked off, Debenhams started playing a ruthless game of corporate Pac-Man and aggressively bought up dozens of successful regional department stores across the country. They would take over a local independent shop, plug it straight into their national supply chain, and eventually hang that polished Debenhams sign right above the door. This strategy rapidly built an inescapable presence in almost every major British city and town. Fast forward to the 2010s, and the magical shopping experience that once defined Debenhams was completely dead. The public perception had shifted drastically, turning a premium high street anchor into a confusing and slightly depressing maze. Navigating the shop floor became an absolute chore because the layout felt specifically designed to disorient rather than guide the shopper. If you wanted to find the menswear department, you usually had to trek into the darkest corners of the upper floors. This steep decline in quality meant that for thousands of people working in city centers, the local Debenhams was reduced to serving only 2 practical purposes. It provided a relatively clean public toilet, and it offered a highly convenient, heated shortcut to walk from the high street into the adjoining indoor shopping mall without having to brave the British rain. People were actively using the store as a hallway rather than a place to actually spend money. Now, the reason these stores felt so bad by the 2010s had absolutely nothing to do with lazy local management. Back in 2003, Debenhams was a remarkably stable business, and they had a massive financial safety net because they actually owned the brick and mortar buildings they operated out of. That level of untapped real estate value is incredibly attractive to corporate investors, and it eventually caught the eye of a consortium called Baroness Retail Limited. Backed by heavy-hitting private equity firms like CVC Capital Partners, they saw an opportunity to launch a takeover bid and swallowed the company whole. As soon as they took control, the new owners executed a ruthless financial maneuver known as a sale and leaseback operation. They took those incredibly valuable physical buildings, sold them off to property investors for massive sums of cash, and then immediately leased those exact same buildings right back to Debenhams. The investors effectively extracted the core value of the entire business and paid themselves handsome dividends. Then, in 2006, they simply floated Debenhams back onto the stock market, securing another massive profit on their way out the door. Debenhams was left completely hollowed out. A business that previously enjoyed the luxury of owning its stores outright was suddenly chained to 30-year rental contracts. To make matters worse, these leases featured upward-only rent reviews, meaning the cost of operating the physical shops would constantly increase, completely regardless of how the wider retail economy was performing. This financial engineering explains exactly why the local shops fell into such disrepair. When a retail business is suffocating under hundreds of millions of pounds of mandatory rent and debt servicing, there's absolutely zero cash left in the treasury. Local managers were completely starved of funds, making it impossible to replace frayed carpets, fix the dim lighting, or invest in modern point-of-sale systems. Every spare penny went straight to the landlords, stripping Debenhams of the cash reserves they desperately needed right as the e-commerce revolution began. With the company drowning in private equity debt and its share price in absolute freefall, Debenhams became a prime target for the most notorious figure in British retail. Mike Ashley, the billionaire founder of Sports Direct and the Frasers Group, has a massive appetite for buying up distressed high street brands, and he saw a perfect opportunity sitting right in front of him. Ashley looked right past the messy aisles and saw a massive opportunity. He knew the Debenhams name still commanded serious respect with the British public, but more importantly, that vast network of physical stores offered the perfect floor plan to cross-sell his own sporting goods and fashion labels. To get his hands on it, he launched a slow, highly methodical corporate siege, and he started quietly vacuuming up shares on the open market, steadily tightening his grip until Frasers Group owned nearly 30% of the entire company. With a massive stake secured, Ashley went straight for the boardroom. He dragged the existing management team through the mud in the press, publicly demanding that the chief executives step down. He even offered a massive bailout, promising to inject tens of millions of pounds of his own cash to keep the struggling business afloat, with the only condition being that they make him the ultimate boss. The Debenhams executives treated him like a hostile invader and fought back at every single turn. They were terrified of handing the keys over to a man famous for running his retail empire like a dictatorship, so they dug their heels in and flat out rejected the money. This bitter power struggle paralyzed the entire operation. While the board of directors and their largest shareholder waged a highly public war through the financial pages, the actual day-to-day business of running a department store fell completely by the wayside. The executives were spending all their time consulting corporate lawyers and fighting boardroom battles instead of figuring out how to survive the rapidly accelerating shift to online shopping. The whole standoff eventually ended in a brutal checkmate, but neither side actually won. The consortium of banks and hedge funds that held the massive Debenhams debt simply ran out of patience. They called in their loans, forced the company into administration, and executed a pre-packed deal that handed ownership directly over to the lenders. In one single stroke, every shareholder was completely wiped out. Mike Ashley watched his massive 30% stake, which was worth roughly £150 million at its peak, turn to dust instantly. Now that the lenders were officially in charge, they had to figure out a way to keep it afloat, and they quickly threw together a desperate turnaround plan. The strategy was to aggressively negotiate rent reductions with those demanding landlords, permanently shut down the absolute worst performing stores, and try to modernize whatever was left of the fleet. It was a massive long shot, but there was a genuine glimmer of hope that a leaner Debenhams could actually survive the decade. All they needed was a solid period of boring, predictable economic stability to pull the plan off. Unfortunately, the universe had other plans. In the spring of 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic swept across the United Kingdom, and the government mandated the immediate closure of all non-essential retail. For a company already trapped in expensive private equity leases, this was worse than a nightmare. Those sprawling 100,000 square foot department stores were suddenly generating absolutely zero revenue, yet the landlords still expected their rent checks every single month. This brutal reality completely vaporized the turnaround plan and forced Debenhams into administration for the second time in just 12 months, passing total control of the company over to FRP Advisory. The administrators launched a desperate search to find a buyer with pockets deep enough to take on the massive operation, keep the physical stores open, and protect the 12,000 staff members whose jobs were suddenly on the line. After scouring the market, they actually managed to get the sportswear giant JD Sports to the negotiating table to discuss a comprehensive rescue package. For a brief moment, it looked like Debenhams might just pull off a miracle escape. The problem, though, was that Debenhams depended heavily on a business model known as concessions. Instead of buying stock wholesale, they rented out prime square footage inside their own buildings to third-party fashion labels. The undisputed king of this arrangement was the Arcadia group, which controlled massive high street brands like Topshop, Burton, and Dorothy Perkins. They essentially treated Debenhams like a giant nationwide landlord. Operating hundreds of concession stands across the country, they effectively ran miniature Topshop and Dorothy Perkins stores right in the middle of the Debenhams clothing departments. This arrangement was a massive financial engine, pulling in roughly £75 million a year and accounting for about 5% of all sales. The massive flaw in this setup was that Arcadia was actively fighting an identical losing battle. They had totally failed to adapt to the online shopping revolution, and the company was buckling under hundreds of millions of pounds of its own corporate debt. On November 30th, 2020, the entire house of cards finally collapsed. The BBC and The Guardian announced that the Arcadia Group had officially gone into administration, putting 13,000 jobs at risk, but more importantly for this story, it sent a shockwave of pure panic straight into the Debenhams boardroom. The fallout hit the rescue negotiations immediately. Since Arcadia was the biggest concession operator in the building, their sudden bankruptcy completely shattered the revenue projections. JD Sports took one look at the vast stretches of newly empty floor space, realized the financial risk was simply too toxic, and officially pulled out of the rescue talks the very next morning. With their last potential buyer walking away, the administrators had absolutely no choice left. They abandoned any hope of saving the physical shops and began the brutal process of liquidating the 242-year-old business. Once the rescue talks collapsed, the transition from a struggling business to a dying one was swift. The Scottish stores were the first to face the axe. The administrators decided they wouldn't even bother reopening the Scottish branches once the regional lockdown restrictions were finally lifted. The staff were given a mere 2 weeks' notice that their livelihoods were gone. Across the rest of the UK, the remaining stores were reopened for one final morbid event, the ultimate fire sale. The shops were stripped of every last bit of prestige. The carefully curated merchandising standards were abandoned, replaced by racks jammed together and handwritten discount signs taped to the peeling walls. Every remaining item of stock was slashed in price to liquidate the inventory as fast as physically possible. Shoppers flooded into the buildings one last time to pick over the bones, and they navigated through messy, half-lit aisles to find heavily discounted saucepans, winter coats, and even the display furniture itself. As each floor was emptied of stock, it was simply cordoned off with yellow tape, and the stores slowly shrank inward, floor by floor, until there was nothing left but echoing rooms and the exhausted staff awaiting for their final paychecks. By May 2021, the heavy shutters were pulled down for the final time, and the 242-year physical legacy of Debenhams officially ended. After closing those stores and cutting around 12,000 jobs, the administrators were now focused on the intellectual property, which was the only real value Debenhams had left. The winner of this auction was the Boohoo Group. Boohoo had built a multi-billion-pound empire by ignoring the high street entirely. They targeted a hyper-connected youth demographic through reality TV stars, aggressive Instagram marketing, and a supply chain so fast it could turn a sketch into a shippable product in 2 weeks. In January 2021, Boohoo agreed to pay the administrators £55 million for the brand, which seems like a bargain for a 2-century-old empire, but for a hyper-modern, digital-first company like Boohoo, the investment was focused entirely on the brand's digital footprint. They acquired the website and a massive database of affluent customers while leaving the liability of the physical stores and the thousands of staff members behind. This allowed them to own a 200-year-old reputation without any of the expensive retail baggage that had originally killed the company. The Debenhams website generates roughly 300 million visits a year, making it one of the most visited shopping sites in the United Kingdom. That massive volume of web traffic represented a demographic that Boohoo desperately needed but couldn't reach. The typical Boohoo customer is usually 18 to 24, hunting for fast fashion deals on a limited budget. By acquiring Debenhams, they instantly took control of a database filled with older, more affluent customers. These were shoppers who traditionally spent significantly more money on premium items and remained loyal to the brand even as the shops themselves fell into disrepair. This acquisition cleared a major hurdle for Boohoo's expansion plans, specifically their desire to move beyond cheap clothing and into the high-margin beauty and homeware sectors. Establishing that level of consumer confidence from scratch is a massive undertaking, particularly for premium cosmetics or expensive kitchen appliances where shoppers need a name they can trust. Debenhams provided that instant credibility, meaning a customer who wouldn't dream of buying a £50 face cream from a fast fashion site felt perfectly comfortable ordering that same product from Debenhams.com. But anyone navigating to the Debenhams website found themselves in a chaotic third-party bazaar, a marketplace where hundreds of independent sellers could list their products directly on the platform. Quality control was effectively replaced by an algorithm that prioritized sheer volume and variety over everything else. This meant the website was quickly flooded with low-quality goods shipped from overseas warehouses, replacing the carefully selected brands people actually associated with the name. Customers began reporting massive headaches with shipping times, confusing return policies, and non-existent customer service, largely because they weren't buying from Debenhams anymore. They were dealing with anonymous vendors hiding behind a famous logo. The heritage name is now being used as a shiny veneer for the same generic products found on platforms like AliExpress or Amazon Marketplace. The emotional attachment the British public spent 2 centuries building is being stretched to its absolute limit. Boohoo is successfully expanding its gross merchandise value, but in the process, they're rapidly diluting the very brand equity they paid £55 million to acquire. Meanwhile, a Chinese powerhouse named Shein entered the market and completely redefined the rules of the game, moving even faster and pricing their products even lower than Boohoo ever could. At the same time, the company's reputation took a massive hit from a series of high-profile supply chain scandals. Investigative journalists exposed harrowing working conditions and illegally low wages in the Leicester factories that supplied the brands. The scandal became a PR disaster that alienated the socially conscious Gen Z demographic that Boohoo relied on for survival. The hyper-connected audience they spent years courting through Instagram influencers and reality TV stars began to associate the brand with exploitation rather than trendy bargains. The combination of international competition and ethical scandals caused the core Boohoo business to bleed money. Their sales plummeted by more than a fifth, forcing the company to aggressively shutter international distribution centers and slash corporate jobs just to stay afloat. By early 2025, the situation reached a breaking point. The new chief executive, Dan Finley, made the radical announcement that the entire Boohoo Group would officially rebrand itself as the Debenhams Group. Boohoo decided that its only path forward was to wrap itself in the 242-year-old heritage name that it had originally purchased for scrap just 4 years earlier. But one thing we barely touched on is that when a digital marketplace like Boohoo acquire a physical brick-and-mortar business like Debenhams only for its name, they leave behind the storefronts. Most of the time, these storefronts just transition to a new business renting the space or maybe a new owner. For the 242-year-old Debenhams with their massive city center locations, the situation was a bit different. Buying those buildings outright will be expensive, renting it out will be expensive, heck, even renovating it after years of neglect and lack of funding will be expensive. On top of that, traditional retail is shrinking at an alarming rate, and few modern brands have any use for 100,000 square feet of vertical space. Local councils and landlords are now forced to engineer radical solutions to prevent their high streets from rotting completely. In major cities, some of these sites are being sliced into smaller, mixed-use units that attempt to blend boutique retail with indoor entertainment venues like bowling alleys or cinemas. In places like Edinburgh and Oxford, the former stores are being converted into luxury hotels or high-end student apartments. Perhaps the most unusual example of this desperation is in Barrow, where the former Debenhams was repurposed as a submarine training facility. A far cry from the perfume counters of the past. But for many towns outside the major metropolitan bubbles, these buildings simply sit in a state of slow decay behind metal security fences. They serve as permanent, rusting monuments to the efficiency of modern retail economics. The market has effectively decided that the convenience of ordering discounted cosmetics from a smartphone is more valuable than maintaining the physical infrastructure of a community hub. In these areas, the Debenhams that people remember, the place for school uniforms, Christmas shopping, and a social cup of tea in the top floor cafe, has been completely erased. While the name lives on in the digital ether, the soul of the department store is buried beneath the empty concrete of the high street. But what do you think? Was the convenience of a digital marketplace worth the loss of the physical department store in your town? Do you think the Boohoo Group made a strategic masterstroke by rebranding itself as Debenhams, or has the name been diluted too far to ever truly recover? Let us know your thoughts and your memories in the comments section below. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the high-stakes collapse of a British institution, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. Anyways guys, thanks so much for watching, and stay curious.